Well, welcome to Christ&Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst, and today we are continuing the discussion on the war with Iran and how the United States is waging war along with Israel against the terrorist regime in Iran in an effort to stop their development of nuclear weapons and to stop their exporting of terror around the globe. So this war is being discussed by Christians in terms of, is it a just war or is it a not just war? So as Christians, we know that the overwhelming opinion, viewpoint, and conviction of most Christians for most of the 2,000 plus years of Christianity, for most Christians, there is a time and a place for a just war. In other words, it is justified to go to war in certain places and certain times for certain reasons. And this is arrived at by simply looking at the Bible. There is no teaching in the Bible that says nations are not allowed to defend themselves. There's no teaching in the Bible that says that nations are not allowed to wage war when their cause is a just and righteous cause. There's no place forbidding war per se, because if you look in the Old Testament, there's no question that there was a lot of warfare, in fact, and God actually led the Jews into the Promised Land to fight and kill the enemy and take over the land. So in the Old Testament, there is no question that pacifism per se, the idea that it is wrong always at all times to go to war, that is just ridiculous. No way. The God of the Old Testament not only sanctioned war, but fought with the Jews in an effort to defeat the enemy. And so he fought along with them. They fought along with God. There was an interaction, synergism between God and the Jewish citizens in fighting their wars to occupy and to hold the Promised Land. Now, when you get to the New Testament, it can be confusing if you simply zero in on certain statements that Jesus made about turning the other cheek and love your enemies, and so on and so forth. If you apply that to a national level, as pacifists have done historically, you think of people like the Amish, Mennonites, certain religious leaders or individuals. They have been pacifist, and they base their pacifism on the words of Christ, turn the other cheek, and so forth. Yes, if you go to the words of Christ and isolate them, and without context, you can say, well, see, Jesus said to love your enemies, so you can't love your enemies when you're shooting at them or bombing them. Oh, really? You can't? Are you sure? You mean a nation cannot love people to the point where they have to stop them from doing harm to their people and to the people around them? There's never a place for intervention. So then, therefore, police have to disarm. You have to take away the guns from police and let the bad guys run wild in a city, because the police cannot be unloving toward those bad guys. They can't shoot at those bad guys. They can't stop, for example, a street gang from raping a woman by using violent force, by shooting into the crowd there of rapists. You can't do that because that wouldn't be a loving thing to do to the rapists. No, it makes no sense. Yes, there is a context to what Jesus is saying. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. He's not addressing nations. He's not telling nations that you can never, ever go to war. Now, that's the problem we have today with Pope Leo, because Pope Leo is trying to absolutize certain teachings of Christ and not contextualize them and not understand that Jesus is not talking about nations going to war against nations. He's not telling, for example, the United States during the time of World War Two, you cannot go into Europe and defend your brothers in England and France, and you can't go in there and fight Hitler, because that would be an unloving thing to do. And fighting against Germans would be unloving. Shooting at Germans would be unloving. Bombing Germans would be unloving. So you can't do that. You just have to sit back, passively wait till things play out, and you cannot go to war. That's what Leo seems to be advocating, and that's totally absurd. It was a loving act for U.S. citizens, men going to Europe to fight against Hitler. That was a loving act on their part, and the United States corporately, to help out Europe. Now, it was also in our best interest, because if Hitler had taken over all of Europe, he probably would have put his sights on the United States next. And given time and consolidating his energy and resource, he probably could have maybe defeated the United States by invading it, if he had taken over all of Europe and all of Asia and all of Africa and the whole world. And so it was a loving thing to go into Europe and fight Hitler, and it was a just war. So Pope Leo is confused. Now, there are Christians, even very conservative Christians, like this Taylor Marshall I'm going to show here, that say that what we're doing in Iran is not a just war. And he has maybe 5 principles of a just war that he thinks that would disqualify the United States from invading Iran. And I want to go through those, because I really think that his list actually justifies the military action in Iran right now. And realize we are not invading Iran with troops on the ground, and we're not battling it out in the streets. We are targeting military operations and the threat of terrorism and nuclear war. So let's go through these 5 points that Taylor Marshall brings up, and I think they're going to actually prove something that he doesn't want, and that is he's trying to defend Pope Leo. He is a Roman Catholic, Taylor Marshall here, and he actually is defending...
In review in Augustine.
Here, let me turn his audio off just a second. Here is Taylor Marshall, and he's trying to defend Pope Leo's remarks on war in Iran. Pope Leo, again, says this is not a just war, and Taylor Marshall is a good Catholic, and he respects the Pope, and that's his Pope. If you're not Catholic, Pope Leo's words don't carry any special weight. As a Protestant, I don't look to Pope Leo as my Pope. He's not my Pope. He has no authority over my life. I don't believe that his office is a biblical office. I don't find any place in the Bible where it says that the church should establish a pope, and that his words on occasion, when he speaks ex cathedra from the chair, that they're infallible. I don't think there is a legitimate spiritual Christian office called the Pope or defined in the Bible. This is a historical development that happened around Rome and gradually developed into what we now call the Vatican and the papal office. So Roman Catholics look to the Pope as an authority. I do not. I think most Christians, Protestant Christians, don't see the Pope as any special authority. So, but the question is not whether the Pope is speaking truthfully. The question is he correct in saying that this war in Iran is not just? Taylor Marshall wants to defend him. So let's see what Taylor Marshall says, and we're going to stop the video and comment along the way. Let's jump right in.
We have proper intent, not vengeance, not malice, working for the common good, protecting the innocents. Second, executed by a proper...
Okay, so let's go back to the first point, proper intent. So Taylor Marshall is basically summarizing really quickly the main 5 points, according to Taylor Marshall, of just war theory, formulated by great theologians of the past like Augustine and Aquinas. And these are heavyweight theologians in the Christian church. They're not just Roman Catholic theologians. They are Christian theologians. who have influenced the wide Christian faith, all branches of Christianity pretty much, for a long time. Aquinas not as much to Eastern Christianity, but Augustine definitely has influenced all of the church, around the world for many centuries. And he says you have to have proper intent. So what is the intent of attacking the Republican Guard, Iran Republican Guard in the nation of Iran? The intention is to stop them from developing nuclear weapons that they can use as terrorist instruments. So that's a good intent. We don't want religious Islamic militant fanatics to acquire the ultimate terrorist weapon, which is a nuclear weapon. Of course, they have terrorist weapons now. They have bombs, which they launch regularly, indiscriminately into Israel, the country of Israel, without targeting military targets, without targeting enemy combatants, you might say. They just lob these missiles with bombs on them into the civilian population of Israel and other nations. Okay, that is terrorism. Okay, that is not, that's totally unjust. Okay, so they're not following any just rules. They're not following anything other than just kill or be killed. And Israeli army and the United States military, they don't do that. We don't just lob missiles into Iran. We are surgically trying to, along with the Israelis, target military operations and military individuals to stop the terrorist regime from terrorizing the world. So proper intent, yes, we have that. We meet that qualification of a just war. Now he's going to say, number 2, the proper magistrate. Let's see what he says.
Proper magistrate, political authority. 3, having.
Okay, so proper magistrate. Is the war being waged by the proper authorities? And the United States has its president, its duly elected president, authorizing a military operation and the military commanders down the chain implementing that operational policy. Is that proper authorization? Now, he's going to make the argument later that, hey, you can't do this because you have to involve Congress, and Congress has to be involved in a formal declaration of war before you can go to war. Well, I ask the question, has that always been the case in the United States? Is it exactly objectively true that the United States cannot take a military action like we're doing in Iran without the whole Congress involved? And if you look back in the history of the United States, the answer is no. That is not an ironclad rule. That is not an ironclad absolute principle that must be and has been always adhered to by the United States. No, the president can take military action on his own authority, and that can carry the full authority of the United States. It's happened before in the past, and it will happen again. And so his principle, number 2, proper authority, launching it, is definitely being met here. So he moves on. Point number 3 here.
A just cause. Next condition.
Okay, a just cause. Definitely, there's a just cause. And the just cause is terrorism is bad. Blowing up civilian targets for political reasons is wrong. It's evil. It's sinful. The way Iran and the militant Islamic terrorists operate and the networks that they support and fund and coordinate, that is an evil operation. There's one thing about waging war, and there can be an unjust war being waged, but there's no question about the fact that terrorism is an unjust means of waging war. So Iran doesn't like Israel in the Middle East. Iran doesn't like the United States and disagrees with all kinds of policies and actions of the United States. And okay, there are a lot of nations that disagree with the United States. I disagree with the government's policies in certain things, but I don't have the right to organize and fund and carry out terrorist acts, blowing up individual civilians in marketplaces and cafes. And if you get a nuclear weapon into the mix, then you're talking about not just blowing up a cafe, roadside marketplace to make a political point. Now you're talking about blowing an entire city up, blowing up the entire city of New York to make a political point, or blowing up the entire nation of Israel, because Israel is so small. I mean, if you drop a nuclear bomb on Jerusalem, you can pretty much blow the entire city up and destroy the entire nation of Israel in the process. If you drop a couple on that nation, it's over. It's done. There's no nation. There's no really rebuilding. There's no place to go. It's small enough that if you have a nuclear terrorist state like Iran developing nuclear weapons, they will then, if they get the technology and they produce these bombs, they will have the means to destroy an entire nation, Israel, and entire cities in the United States if they choose, or in Europe for that matter. So the just cause is there. We have a just cause, okay? So let's move on to his next point.
Last resort. Thomas Aquinas added that war is lawful only when there is no other way to secure peace.
Okay, so last resort. We have been dealing with this radical Islamic terrorist regime now for almost 50 years. And there have been many different presidents trying to come up with a solution to this. There have been many different deals that have been struck, the Obama administration being the last one. And they basically gave away the whole farm. They said, yeah, you can develop nuclear weapons, but just, slow it down and we'll release all your money and blah, blah, blah. It was a terrible, awful deal that they struck with the Iranians. And it probably accelerated their nuclear program until more conservative presidential administrations came in and said, no, put an end to that. Trump did, definitely in his first term. And so, you have to think about these principles, and when you think about these principles, every single one of them we meet. So we'll see what Taylor Marshall says about how the Iran war is disqualified from a just war.
Negotiation should always precede violence or war if possible.
All right, so it has to be last resort. So all these negotiations by former administrations, all these actions to try to solve this Islamic terrorist problem, all failed. Trump, in his first term and then his second term, is trying to deal with this Islamic radical terrorist problem in Iran, state-sponsored terrorists. If you look on the watch list, Iran is always at number one in state-sponsored terrorism. Funding state-sponsored terrorism, planning state-sponsored terrorism, encouraging through its proxies all over the Middle East terrorism, okay? This is the poisonous snake in the Middle East. And there have been attempts over the last 50-some years to deal with this, and nothing has happened, okay? So what does it mean as a last resort? How long do you have to wait? How many talks do you have to have with them to realize they're not changing? They're not going to negotiate an end to their nuclear program. They're not going to negotiate an end to their terrorist operations. They have to be pushed into a corner so that the only thing they can do is stop their nuclear program, stop their state sponsor of terrorism, and join the civilized world. That's the only way, by force. So again, meets the fourth point.
In a way, that's kind of an expansion here of number 1 in Augustine. It's just a clarification. And then number 5, Aquinas adds that there should be probability of success.
Okay, probability of success. Does the United States, combined with Israel, does the United States have the capacity to succeed in eliminating a nuclear Iran? The capabilities of building a bomb? Yes. There's a high probability that if we really try hard, we can stop them and stop their nuclear weapons program. Yes. So that's a very practical, high probable success rate. And we also have the weapons and the technology and the military might to go in and stop them from being the number 1 exporter of terrorism in the world. So there is a high probability of success that because we are the strongest military force in the world, and then Israel, this tiny little nation, can do actual spy work and surveillance work and monitor the situation there, and the United States can come in with the heavy firepower. Yes, there's a high probability that we can achieve all of our objectives and bring about peace in the Middle East and at least eliminate this nuclear terrorist threat that has been there for many decades.
Should be, according to Aquinas, a reasonable hope that violence or war will end with the intended outcome of success unto peace.
Yes, so there is a reasonable hope. In fact, it's a very high probability that we can actually achieve our military objectives in Iran, and we won't have to send troops and fight it out in the streets like Israel had to do, say, in Gaza against Hamas. So, yeah, all of these points line up. Now, he's going to say, oh, no, they don't all line up. There's one point that doesn't line up, and so it's not a just war. But that's really a stretch. Let's see what he says.
We should have the bishops and the Pope just saying, here are the 5 conditions. We should have the United States government. This should be enshrined in our Constitution. Every congressman and the president should have to check 5 boxes.
Okay, well, I'm not real big on giving a number of boxes. Just because Augustine and Aquinas have come up with 5 points for a just war, that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the only considerations we have to consider, and it doesn't mean that those 2 theologians are infallible. Just because Augustine and Aquinas come up with 5 principles of just war, their authority alone doesn't mean that they are the final word on a just war. We have to look at all of the Bible. We have to consider other considerations, but these are big main points, and I do agree that those are probably the big main points. But just because Augustine said something and just because Aquinas says something, again, in the Roman Catholic Church, these 2 men are heavyweight authorities. But as the Reformation taught, the Bible alone is the authority in the Christian church. So everything has to be tested by the clear and wise interpretation of the Bible. So you sit down with the Bible, and you can allow theologians like Augustine and Aquinas to teach you things from the Bible, and if it makes sense, then you say amen to them. But just like any other pastor or preacher or speaker that you have in the Christian church, you test all things with Scripture. So you test everything that Aquinas says, you test everything that Augustine says, including their just war theories, and you say, okay, yeah, that lines up with Scripture. That seems to be consistent with the both Old and the New Testament, so on and so forth. But just because Aquinas and Augustine speak doesn't mean we necessarily have to listen, and just because they have 5 points doesn't mean we have to say there are only 5 points to a just war. No, that's his Roman Catholicism coming out. But let's hear what he says.
Do you have proper intent? Is this being authorized by rightful authority? Number 3, is this a just cause? Number 4, is this a last resort? Have we attempted a negotiation? And
Yes.
then number 5, do we have probability of success?
Yes.
If all 5 boxes are checked, you can go to war.
Okay, it seems like all 5 boxes in this case are being checked. So do we go to war? Well, Taylor Marshall said no because, well, let's let him explain.
Congress holds the power to declare war. It's in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8.
Okay. So he's going to say everything else applies in the just war theory except this point that Congress never voted to officially declare war on Iran. And so that's the problem with Trump going into Iran. And that, I would say, is a technicality. It's a triviality. And Americans can debate and we can discuss, and maybe we should come up with a final verdict on this issue, whether a president without Congress can launch a military operation or go into a situation where he has to call out the military and so on and so forth, or whether only Congress can do that. Yeah, that's an internal debate in our country. It is not a settled issue. So to say that the President of the United States doesn't have the authority, clear cut, no question, 100%, that is false. Now, there may come a time in our country where we have a law that says only Congress, under any circumstances, can tell the military to go here or there or do anything. Okay, if we do that, okay, then it's settled in our country, at least, as far as legally. But we haven't done that yet, and we have allowed different presidents to take military actions in many different ways, and it's been that way since the very beginning of our nation. So to camp out on that one point and say, see, President Trump didn't go to Congress and get authorization, so therefore it's not a just war. That is a triviality. That is a technicality. And Taylor Marshall knows it. And he's just trying to defend Pope Leo because he's a Roman Catholic too. But when you take away that triviality, yeah, it's a just war.
No declaration has been made by Congress.
Okay.
Pope Leo, if you're watching, do an audience where you go through the 5 conditions of just war and say, I would like all the bishops of the world to reiterate this in their diocese so that all Catholics know what is a just war and what is not a just war.
Okay. So, you've heard it. You've heard what the just war principles are, the main ones by Aquinas and Augustine and others. And now you've heard Taylor Marshall's little trivial problem with the authority issue. But I say it's not an issue, really, because it's still a debate in our country. So we'll see you back next week. Hope this has been helpful, and God bless.